Well, hello, everybody. Good day, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're listening from, watching from. Thank you for joining us. This is the second of our JMIB webinar Zooms. The first was, of course, on that thorny topic of the premature oxidation of the whites. And this one is going to be the start of a series looking at individual parts of Burgundy and how they're changing. So it'll be talking about both the vineyards and the people. There's been a thread on a well-known bulletin board talking about the relative importance of terroir and producer. And of course, they're both crucial. I think most of us choose the wines we're going to drink by producer first. But at the same time, we have favorite terroirs. And it may be true now, with global warming, that some of those terroirs are actually changing in character. So one thing I hope to do during this series is to take a look at the various different vineyard areas and individual vineyards even, and we can work out which ones were fantastic, exactly what we wanted, and maybe are at risk now, and which other ones we perhaps ignored in the past and should be paying more attention to. We're also going to take a little bit of a look at the producers. Obviously, we can mention the established classics, but which people are bounding up in the world and joining the superstar category, and which other people are maybe just starting out, but are good people to watch and a place where you may be able to get exciting wine at a relatively low price still. So what I thought we would do is start at the northern end of the Côte Nuits. We won't necessarily continue in a straightforward geographic pattern thereafter. We might jump around a little bit to vary the pace. But this evening, we're going to start in the outskirts of Dijon and go through Marsannay, Fixin, Gevrey-Chambertin, Morey-St-Denis, probably stop at Morey. I'll see how the time goes. We might include Chambol this week as well. Right, so that's the background. Because it's a little bit earlier than we normally do, I'm actually drinking a cup of tea rather than having a glass of wine, but it's I was going to say single vineyard. It's a single estate Darjeeling first flush from 2020. And the other thing which I will perhaps try to do as we go along is bring in a few tidbits about what's happening with the 2019s, which I'm just beginning to taste, and also how the 2020 growing season is going. So I see a couple of people are now putting messages on the chat. Please feel free to do that all the way through. If you are drinking wine, let us know what you're drinking, where you've come from, and just keep comments going throughout this hour. And ask questions. If there's a question you particularly want answered, then put it on the Q&A section. If you're not sure, then mention in the chat, ask how to do it, and we will let you know. Grand. Okay, so the Côte Nuits. We're going to start up in the city of Dijon. I was going to start with Marsannay, and I thought, but no. There is a place called the Côte Dijonnaise, and that's a general term for it, which really covers just a few individual vineyards scattered around. There's even one that's planted in the airport, Dijon airport. I suppose maybe I should call it an airfield rather than an airport, because a previous commandant, as it's a military airport as well as a commercial one, loved wine, and so he decided there was a patch alongside the runway that might be good for a vineyard. And I understand that they're actually going to build on that and do even more. There are some up on the heights just north of Dijon. Domaine Morte, for example, has some good Pinot up there, which I enjoy. And there are several either just in or on the outskirts of Dijon. But now somebody has developed an interesting domain, Domaine de la Croix. It's existed, in fact, I think since the 1980s, but it had fallen pretty much out of favor. But they put a youngster in charge. And Scott, if we can have the picture of the Côte Dijonnaise up, that would be great. They have planted a bit of Pinot, a bit of Chardonnay, I think some Manigote, maybe some Gamay. And here you can see it now on the screen. So we have got, we're on the plateau, just south and fractionally west of Dijon. And then through that particular hole in the plateau, you can see down to the city itself. And what you can see from that is that there is almost no topsoil. You're straight on the rock, straight on the limestone. And I think there are some quite interesting, wacky, funky wines being made there, because Marc Soya, who's the guy in charge, He's very much into the low sulfur, pretty much natural style of winemaking. And he does some quite fancy labels as well as more classic ones. But we will see a little bit of planting in offbeat places like this, because there's precious little left that can be planted in the classical vineyards of the Côte d'Or. Thanks for that picture. So we'll move instead to Marsannay. Take a look at the Marsannay map. And breaking news is that they have just increased the size of the Marsannay vineyard quite substantially by a whole 80 hectares. And here we come with the Marsannay map. Yes, thank you. If we can increase the size of that, that's great. You will see several colours here. You've got the grey, which is actually the buildings, because Marsannay has become an overspill from Dijon, and there was a period when it looked as though most of the vineyards were going to get eaten up and turned into housing estates. Then you've got this light maroon colour, which up to now has only been allowed for Marsannay Rosé, because you may remember that Marsannay has the appellation for all three colours, is unique in Burgundy for that. And what I will do actually is I should take control of the map so I can actually show you what's going on. And as well, so these vineyards, which were just Marsannay Rosé, I suspect are now going to be allowed to make Marsannay. Plus, if we were to go off to the right, I hope that you can see, let me annotate, and then I can check. If you can see my annotation, I will know that it's all working. If we can see here, where that little arrow is showing, if we headed off to the right there, we would come to a vineyard called Le Chapitre, and after that another one called Montrecul, and they have both been upgraded from Bourgogne and put into the Marsannay appellation. In fact, Chapitre is on a really good bit of terroir, and frankly, when they make Marsannay Premier Crus, which is the next topic, that's been in the pipeline for at least 10 years now. They're still not quite there, but when that happens, then so we will get a number of these vineyards promoted to Premier Cru, and frankly, they won't do it straight away because it's too recent, but Le Chapitre should be one of them. So the Premier Crus, I'm going to switch tool, are in several areas. First of all, there's up here, there is the future Premier Crus, I should say. There is Champerdry. This one here is going to be a Premier Cru. Next to it, why has that disappeared? I don't know. Let me switch to a smaller. Champerdry is going to be a Premier Cru. Clos is going to be a Premier Cru, and it's going to grab a little bit of the vineyard next door. Then we're going to move over to Champ-Solomon, will be a Premier Cru. Quite a few here. Saint-Jacques, Favier, Grasse-Tête, whoops, down there. Charmeau-Pret and Le Boivin. So all, and Clos de Jeu, all this sector here is going to be Premier Cru. And finally, Les Échezeaux, even though it's high up here, they're going to have to change the name because Échezeaux won't be allowed. It's too similar, obviously, to the Grand Cru. So they're going to call it Ez, one word, and then Chezeaux spelled differently, one word. And all the way through here, through the Longerois, through Clos du Roi, which is arguably the best vineyard of all, and back around, En Mont-Chenevoix will just become part of Longerois. And En Montagne is going to be included too. Voila. So that lot, they will be Premier Crus. So they're all around the same contour line and on fairly similar soils. There are variations in the soil, but they're mostly different forms of classical limestone, such as you would see in other villages. So that's roughly what's going to be happening here in Marsannay. Because of this project, there is more interest being shown in Marsannay, and there are more growers doing quite exciting things. So, for example, the classic name, I suppose, in Marsannay, and that's partly because he's got vineyards up and down the Côte, including in Chambertin-Clos-de-Bèze, lovely Savigny Dominode, Bonnemar, all over the place, really, is Bruno Clair. So he's the one who's would be most people's leader for Marsannay. He's got several good cuvées of Marsannay. But alongside him, we've got lots more slightly less well-known growers, but they're getting better known. And I would particularly cite Sylvain Pataille, who is partly a consultant enologist to others and partly a grower in his own right. And he's a wild child, hair all over the place, but very, very sound and solid in terms of how he manages the wine. He's pushing a number of boundaries in terms of vinification techniques. He's one of the few who's crushing his red grapes. He does whole bunch, but crushing the grapes, which is really quite interesting and gives something that's really very heady. Right, we seem to have got the map back up with all my slightly weird drawings on them. We can kill that if you like now, Scott, and we'll go to maybe show the map of the pictures of a couple of the producers. Sylvain Pataille is doing several different single vineyard aligotes, and alongside that is a chap called Laurent Fournier, who is a good friend of Sylvain Pataille. Here, our picture here is Bruno Claire, and he's looking, I mean, he's Bruno and his, I'll call him sidekicks, like Philippe Brun, who's been his right-hand man for 35 plus years now. They are coming towards retirement. I think two of Bruno's sons are interested in getting involved, already are working there, and Philippe will retire too. But here's an excited looking Bruno, just taken last year, showing the geological map, not of Marsannay, but of Gevrey-Chambertin. He's been very excited. His finger's on Latricia-Chambertin, even though he doesn't have any of that. But something that we're going to be able to do increasingly is put alongside, as that picture shows, the vineyard maps. You can see the bit below in various different colors of red and purple. Those are the different vineyards of Gevrey-Chambertin, and then above it is the geological breakdown. So we're going to see more of that. And behind Bruno is a little wooden egg for him to, I think the Marsannay is made in that and in bigger wooden ovals called food. Okay, so then so if he's established, then Sylvain Pataille and Laurent Fournier are the new guys coming up. They're not alone in this, but Laurent Fournier is also doing single vineyard aligotes. He doesn't have a huge domain, but he makes maybe 35 different wines. He constantly is experimenting with slightly different terroirs, different ways of doing it. And you can't necessarily see from that, but he has big barrels up to, mostly he's working with 600-litre barrels. Means he can afford to renew his barrels quite frequently, but without too strong an oak effect. So I'm getting thirsty with my cup of tea, but just having a look on the chat on the side, see what everybody else is going for. Howard, it's not Domaine de Croix, that's down in Beaune, it's Domaine de la Cras, C-R-A-S, and his name is Marc Soya. He's been there, I think, since about 2014, 2015. Goodness me, I'm actually going to have some something from Gevrey-Chambertin. I'll tell you about it a bit later on. But I'd like to be with you, David, drinking on Denis Bachelet, Gevrey-Chambertin Vieille 2000, or with Lee, who's tucking into Sylvie Emonin's Vieille Gevrey 2010. And various other people pulled out some nice stuff. Good news. So other people in Marsannay, what's interesting is that lots of them are doing many, many different single vineyard bottlings, partly in the hope that their vineyards will become Premier Crus. There are going to be 14 Premier Crus if it all goes ahead, but it's Laurent, chap in the picture there, who's been in charge of the dossier, and he's still got some hair, but I know he's been putting it out by the roots because it has been quite fraught getting where he wants to be. Another domain Bar, B-A-R-T, who are cousins of Bruno Claire's, is really good. Like him, it's got some Chambertin, Clos de Bez, and some Bon Mar, but also they make 8 or 10 different single vineyard cuvées of Marsannay, and there's some exciting stuff there. Young Cyril Audouin of Domaine Charles Audouin is up there. Bernard Bouvier, Domaine René Bouvier. And a bigger concern, which wouldn't have been on our radar before, but has really picked up its game, is the Chateau de Marsannay. It's the same ownership as the Chateau de Meursault. Stéphane Follin-Arbelay is the sort of the big boss in charge of managing it. But they've got a top-class enologist, stroke winemaker, technical director there, and it's really beginning to happen. And they also have at least 8, if not more, single vineyard bottlings of Marsannay. So expect more to come from Marsannay, but I think that's sort of a little bit known. There's a bit more love given to Marsannay these days and less to Fixin or Fixin, depending on exactly how many. I've just seen Christian's question. There'll be 14 Premier Crus, I understand, for Marsannay. But we'll wait and see. And you should be able to find the webinar on white premature oxidation on our website. Scott will let you know if that's not the case, but I believe it is. Okay, let's take a look at the map of Fixin, please, and we can talk about this village. Why is it underestimated, or at least not much loved, and could that change? Right, here comes Fixin. If we can increase that, that's brilliant. You can see how narrow it is. So shaded just to the right is the word Couche, which is the first village of Marsannay, and off to the left is Brochant, part of which is just Côte village, and part of which is Gevrey-Chambertin. And you've got this small narrow band of Fixin. And at the top, you've got the Premier Crus. Just need to take control here. Not many of them, but only 3 of them are really ever seen. Actually, one of them, though it exists in theory, doesn't happen. It's all built over. I don't know if you can see here, there's the one called the Maybach. It's supposed to be 1.5 hectares. It's officially designated as Premier Cru land, and it's all little bungalows and tiny gardens and mini swimming pools and things like that. Never mind. So the main ones are Les Hervelets and Les Arvelets, which can just call itself Hervelet. If you're in Hervelet, you can use either name. The reason why you've got different names are because this commune is actually 2 different villages stuck together in 1860. One is called Fixin and the other is called Fixey, F-I-X-E-Y, and the boundary comes down between these 2 bits of vineyards. And as so often, when you have one vineyard which should have the same name, split across 2 different parishes, they decide to make the name slightly different. Probably better known are Clos de la Perrière, Clos du Chapitre, and this one here, which is called on the map officially Aux Choses, but is known as the Clos Napoleon. That belongs entirely to Domaine Gelin. They bought it in the 50s when it wasn't planted, so they planted it up. They haven't had to replant anything yet. Nice old vines. Clos de la Perrière belongs entirely to Domaine Joliet, but in that sense it's a monopole, but in another sense you will see it from different producers because they also sell off some grapes and wine, and you see Bichot makes a big bottling of Clos de la Perrière, and Joseph Drouin used to. The owner, Bénigne Joliet, is keen that this should be promoted to Grand Cru, because in the 19th century it was regarded in the same breath as the great Grand Crus. The wines are good now, but they certainly aren't Grand Cru. It's well worthy of its Premier Cru status. Whether the Pinot Noir selection isn't quite good enough, whether some tweaks in the winemaking could happen, I don't know. I do think the wine is good, but I still feel that there's a bit more that could be delivered. Clos du Chapitre is a monopoly of the Dufouleur family, Domaine Guy and Yvan Dufouleur, and they again make some themselves, and they also sell some on. So you'll see quite a few different négociants, some classic ones, and also some of the sort of mini ones like Jean-Nicolas Maillot, Domaine Maillot-Camusset, with his Maillot-Camusset Frères et Sœurs, Sœurs et Frères négociant business. He makes a little bit of this wine. So those are the only Premier Crus. The village wines, occasionally people pull out a particular vineyard. I'm going to mention just one here. It's called Encomberois. It belongs mostly, if not entirely, to Domaine Berthaud-Gerbet. And it sits inside. It looks like an enclave in another bigger village vineyard, but it rises up higher, and it's much more like the Premier Crus, Hervelet and Hervelet. And yeah, I mean, it's sold at village price, but it gives you an extra punch. So that's a little one to look out for. And the special person in the village now is Amélie Berthaud, daughter of Denis Berthaud, and his wife was a Gerbet from Faune-Romanée. So she has combined those two domains, which were separate in the previous generation. She's combined the two, plus they have some sharecropping agreements, and they've got a wonderful stable. She makes the wines really well. I actually fell in love in particular with the Clos Vougeot in 2017, which she told me that she had extracted a little bit less than the other wines because she feels that Clos Vougeot can be a bit galumphing, a bit massive. And it was my wine of the vintage out of her cellar that year. I'm not suggesting that she really over extracts the others because there's no feeling of that compared to other producers. But I think as time goes by, she gets more relaxed. I think there will be a slight lightening up, and I think the wines will become even better. And I'll mention him now, even though he's not making his wines in this cellar. But her husband, Nicolas Faure, I think is one of the really exciting talents. His own domain only has a little bit of village Nuits Saint-Georges, and mostly it's generics otherwise. But I love the style. He goes for lots of whole bunch, whole cluster fermentation, whereas on the whole, Amélie doesn't. She is more in the destemmed camp. Otherwise, the classic domains of the village are Gélin, who I mentioned with the Clos Napoléon. Also, domain Molin. I haven't tasted their wines for a little while. Amélie says I should be getting around and tasting at Philippe Nadef, so another one to look out for. And one which I've seen the name around a little bit, but have no experience of, is Clemenceau, that I'm going to try and get there. Yeah. Now, why might Fixin be getting better? I think we're going to find this elsewhere up and down Burgundy. But broadly speaking, the characteristic of Fixin, people have said, well, it's a poor man's Gevrey-Chambertin. The fruit quality doesn't seem to us to be better, and the tannins are, if anything, a bit more rustic. Now, like everywhere in Burgundy, this is the classic clay-limestone mix, but there's quite a lot of clay in the soil, which gives you the firmer wines for the tannins. And it can be quite a humid soil, humid because there are springs bringing water close to the surface. And typically, where you get these sorts of conditions, the structure of the Pinot, physiologically, the grapes don't quite ripen, and you get some slightly harsh tannins. Now, with global warming, we're probably going to warm up the soil, we're going to dry out the soil a bit, and I suspect we're going to see a little bit more refinement, a little bit more class in quite a number of Fixins. So it's one of the areas I've got my eye on. I didn't taste widely enough the 2018 vintage. I'll try and do a few more domains in 2019. But this would be a candidate for me of an area that's probably going to benefit rather than suffer from the global warming. Mark's mentioned these. I saw on Cellar Tracker that Alain Geniard, who does do just a few Négociant bottlings, have got some Clos de la Perrière 15, and that's very interesting. I'd love to hear how that works out. When you say I have some, I assume you mean you've got some in your cellar rather than you're having some tonight. And you've got some in Combois too. Great. Keep those messages coming. It's wonderful when we can have a bit of dialogue going. Grand. So I think that probably covers Fixin for us, unless anybody's. I'll just check my questions and see if anyone's asked that. Gabrielle wants to know if a crew has ever been demoted. Not could it be possible in the future with climate change issues? The only cases in which crews have been demoted is if it's part of the vineyard, if the owner of that part has been a naughty boy and has done something like bringing in soil from elsewhere, then it can be demoted. It's happened in Puy-de-Dôme, quite a while ago now, I think in the 70s. Little bits of Chalumeau and Falatière, I think. A whole crew has never been demoted so far. I wonder what the mechanism for that would be. The other thing that's happened is a few vineyards which were at village level have been kicked back down to Bourgogne, but that was because when the appellations came in, they were given a 50-year tolerance. We'll see this on a Gevrey-Chambertin map. Some of them said, okay, because you have been calling it Gevrey-Chambertin, we'll let you do it for the future possible life of your vineyard, and after that we'll stop it. So from sort of 1940s to 1990s, bits of Gevrey-Chambertin were. Yes, Ilias mentioned about that Falatier from Daubenay. It's a bit called En La Richard. And that, I think, was because the previous, Daubenay didn't own it then, it was the previous owner, Mr. Ropito, who, when they were putting the autoroute in, he went down and brought out lots of earth from the autoroute and shoved it into his vineyard. Grand, okay. We'll finish with Fixin for a moment, and let's move on to Gevrey-Chambertin. You can swap maps, please, Scott. Okay. Sorry, I see what I've done. I'm going to take back the screen. What's happened is that my previous hearts have reappeared on this map. So I'll just try and get rid of those for you. Play around with some brand new hearts. Clear. Please go away, hearts. Go on, you can do it, you know you can. It's happened, great. Apologies for that. My technical skills, not everything I would like them to be. So Gevrey-Chambertin, I don't know if we can make that map any bigger, Scott, or if that's the maximum we can do with it. But if we can, let's. So coming up next week, on Thursday next week, the 25th, I'm going to be doing a Zoom on our friends at 67 Pall Mall on their bandwidth, which is looking at all the Grand Crus of Gevrey-Chambertin, apart from the two big names, Chambertin and Clos de Bez. But we're going to look at each of the satellite ones and talk about the differences. So I won't go into that now, except where it actually affects our topic. I hope you can see my mouse scurrying around. But if we look at Gevrey-Chambertin, the thing that surprises people is to see all these vineyards below the main road. So here you've got your main road coming along here. And why are the vineyards below? And the answer is because we were, when, this is what we were talking about just earlier, that some of these vineyards here, Bressonnier and next door also, and a bit of Ranceville, these were Gevrey-Chambertin vineyards for about 50 years. The reason they got declassified, I mentioned, because they sort of ran out of their time limit. But if you look up here, where my mouse is twiddling backwards and forwards, you have the Combe de Lavaux, steep valley, which used to be a watercourse, down which cold air comes, but also previously, watercourse, it's spread out all sorts of soil right across in what the French call a cône de déjection, and I think we call an alluvial fan. And you've got interesting soils which spread out below the main road instead of all just being above it. So that's why you get some Gevrey down here. These make the lighter Gevreys on the whole, but there's some interesting soil in the Clos de Justice, if I can find La Justice, which is just here. Boing, let's give it a heart, why not? That's got an interesting soil which makes wines which last a little bit longer. Otherwise, I think the most interesting village Gevrey-Chambertins are around here. So we've got Eversel, we've got, which is up here, which arguably probably could be a Premier Cru. You can see there's a line of Premier Crus coming around here from the Combe de Lavaux, Lavaux Saint-Jacques, Clos Saint-Jacques, Castier, Combe-Moine, Goulot, Champeau. Probably the reason Eversel isn't a Premier Cru is because it's moved over into the border with the village of Brochon, and maybe they didn't want to take that deal. Below here you have two called Champ and Enchant, there and there. They changed the name because you cross the border into Brochon. Those are really, really nice vineyards. And this whole sector, Genois as well, and probably Ensange. This sector, I think, is probably the best for village Gevrey-Chambertin. There are other individuals which are nice, like Champ-Chenis just below Chambertin, and Ozette-Loire. The lower bit's a bit dull, but if you come up in this finger right underneath Criot-Chambertin, that's good. And in fact, when I get on to talking about producers, I'll talk about Domaine Durocher, and they have that little finger there, and they also have a number of vines up here in Genois, Champ, and so on. So they're very well looked after. Those are the sweet spots then at the moment. And then the Premier Crus, so they come in several areas. We have Combat here, which if you think about it, is on the end of the line of the Grand Crus, and everything beyond is Morey-St-Denis Grand Cru. Just one vineyard isn't, it's Combat, but a Combe is a dip, a valley. Combat is just a small one. You can see the way the contour lines up there go back up into the hill. So you are definitely lower lying, more humid soil. I actually adore wines from Combat, but probably it's right that it's a really good Premier Cru rather than Grand Cru. And the other explanation in the past was that at the time of making the Grand Crus, all the owners of Combat lived in Morey-St-Denis and not in Gevrey-Chambertin, which may or may not be true. You've got the Premier Crus which lie just under Grand Crus here, which tend to be on a shallower soil, and they make quite supple wines. There is a bit more depth of flavour, a bit more character than a lot of the village wines, but they're not frontline Premier Crus. From here on I go, and Champignanois. Cat's just joined me, hope he won't jump on the screen. Up around to Le Corbeau. Decent, but not spectacular. We've got Bel Air here, which goes back up into the forest, definitely cool, so as a cool area, might do well in the future. And of course, it's next door to Ruchot-Chambertin, just above Chambertin-Clos de Bez, so yeah, could be interesting. Part of that's Premier Cru, part of it is village, as it gets too far up the hill. Fontenay, Champonnay, Crépillot. These Crépillot, Champonnay lower down. Fontenay starts low down and actually comes up. And the top bit, Clos de Fontenay of Bruno Clair and the Fontenay of Domaine du Gapi, for example, are quite a bit higher up than the bits which are lower down here. They're not bad at all. And probably, apart from Combat, my favourites are going to be around the Clos Saint-Jacques on either side. So most of us are perfectly happy that Clos Saint-Jacques stays a Premier Cru, but we acknowledge that it could easily have been a Grand Cru. It sells at the same price as most Grand Crus. As you know, Rousseau charges more for that than he does for any of his Grand Crus, apart from the two top ones. Lavaux Saint-Jacques, I used to ignore slightly because I felt that it was down at the bottom, it's quite richer soil. It's definitely cooler. There's a noticeable stream of cool air. I mean, we're talking 2 or 3 degrees cooler that comes down the Combe de Lavaux, funneled down it. But with global warming, in 2018, I just loved the wines that came out of this area here. Lavaux, Estonel, and so on. Estonel and Poissonneau, they get the cool air from here, and they're higher on the slope. There's an oddity with Estonel. I don't know if you've got that picture to hand, Scott, but we've got a little pic, if you just show it briefly for a second, of the top of Estonel Saint-Jacques, where somebody has pulled back a little bit of the, here we are, they've cut back into the hillside, they checked the map, discovered that the appellation would allow them to go a bit higher up than they had gone, and they're going to plant that up. The appellation only allows them to plant Pinot, but frankly, look at the colour of that soil. That's a really white soil, and it would be really nice in white. And I remember Pierre-Henri Gaget of Louis Chateau saying that they used to have about 20% white grapes, a hangover from a previous period, in their Estonel Saint-Jacques. And when they replanted only with Pinot, and he felt that the wine became less good as a result of that. And if you continued on round into Poissonneau, with Domaine Humbert, this I think is probably Charles Magnan, Domaine Henri Magnan. And next door there's a bit that's been planted by Domaine Humbert. But I know that Charles Magnan, if he were allowed to, would enjoy to plant whites there. Okay, let's go back to the Gevrey map if we may. Ilian wants to know the difference between Lavaux Saint-Jacques and Clos Saint-Jacques today. Well, Clos Saint-Jacques is special because of its south and east showing. And of course, Clos Saint-Jacques has got 3 soil types as you go up and down, and everybody has got holdings that go all the way up and down. Lavaux Saint-Jacques also will have differences in the soil as you go up. It's flatter at the bottom, slightly deeper soil. the rows also mostly, not everybody's, mostly go a long way up. I remember Cyril Rousseau said that they always try and do the Lave Saint-Jacques in the morning, because if they start working there after lunch at picking time, and you just keep going up the row and you never see the end of the row, and you get very demoralized. So it tends to be picked on the last morning of their harvest. It does remain a cooler harvest. I remember Denis Mortet telling me that a cooler vineyard, that in 2003, that's an incredibly hot year, he still chaptalized his Lave Saint-Jacques because it's always the last to be picked and was always the least ripe. If we continue around the other side, I really enjoyed Castier, if you pronounce it closer together, and that's a vineyard that's been good for quite a while. But we're getting sunnier here. We're east facing Castier, Combon, all of those. They're making lovely wines already. They don't quite come into the category of things where the global warming could take them even further. I'll just mention Goulot and Champeau. Champeau gets a little bit of love because many people who have Lave Saint-Jacques, some of the famous names, also have Champeau. Not many people think of Goulot, set back a little bit. A couple of parcels of vineyards stuck in small quarries, as is true of Combon as well. But I've had beautiful Goulot recently from Florence Herestein and from her grapes made by Benjamin Leroux. And of course, Morey-Fourier also has it. So that's a name that's never really been on everybody's lips, but is well worth looking out for. So Gevrey-Chambertin, maybe at some point or other, global warming could start to affect some of the vineyards down here. If it does, then I think it might be more likely to be Griot, Chapelle, and the Premier Crus along here. Chambertin and Clos de Berre is a little bit cooler with the forest right behind them. There's a bit more soil in La Trissière, Chambertin, Mazy-Chambertin. Ruchot-Chambertin is very little soil, but again, it's a tiny bit cooler. They should be all right. But the big gain is up in this area here. I think up in Lave Saint-Jacques and those other vineyards close by. So that's my feeling for Gevrey-Chambertin. Otherwise, there's a lot that's happening in the detail of all the producers that's going on. So I did a little bit of delving because the problem with something like this is you mention all the producers that you know, and then you find you've forgotten somebody who really should have been up there in the front line. So number one for everybody, and they used to be wonderfully cheap. Now they have had to put their prices up a bit, but of course Domaine Rousseau is the grand classic, and maybe in the top category, certainly in the secondary market, they've perhaps been joined by Domaine Fourier under the stewardship of Jean-Marie Fourier, and he has made some really quite extraordinary wines. My problem here, reason I'm hesitating, is every time we say, and the new superstar is, then the prices suddenly start going up and the secondary market takes over. Perhaps one of the things that will come out of the current crisis is that there will be less excitement and in secondary markets, less people. I suppose I don't mind people paying lots of money if they're buying it in order to drink it, but I always get upset when people are buying for speculative reasons. It's not why the producer made the wine in the first place. Close behind those two, I personally think that Arnaud Mortet, both Domaine Denis Mortet and then look out for wines coming under his own name too, which are separate vineyards. It's not it has a status of négociant, but actually they're vineyards that they run, but they weren't the family vineyards. They've come in from different sources, so they're under a different label. And intriguingly, there's a Lave Saint-Jacques made as Domaine Denis Mortet and a Lave Saint-Jacques made as Arnaud Mortet, and he deliberately makes them slightly differently, puts more stems in one than the other to make the difference. But personally, I think he's a great talent, and I have preferred his wines to what his father made, even though from 93 through to his sad death in 05, Denis Mortet did make spectacular wines. He wanted to make lighter and finer and more elegant wines, but every improvement he made just seemed to make them richer, and it must have been a frustration for him. I admire what he did, but Arnaud, I think, has got a finer touch. Then you've got the two members of the Dugas family, Dugas and Dugas-Py, both of whom benefit from having really, really good grape material. And And Claude Dugas said to me one day that he wants to have as many bunches of grapes as his neighbours. So it's not one small yield by not having many bunches of grapes, but he wants his bunches to be smaller, and he's got the right material to do it. And also on the Dugas side, they made very similar comments. I did find in the early days of the fame of Dugas that I thought the wines were a little bit over-extracted, and I found that they dried a bit with age. But I think now that the son Loic has taken over and just fine-tuned what he's doing, I'm feeling that the wines are becoming that little bit suppler and perhaps more age-worthy. So they're up there as contenders. A couple who are long-term classics, but never want to be in the limelight. Don't have that many of the really top vineyards. They both have incredibly old vines in Gevrey-Chambertin. You're probably way ahead of me. We're talking about Denis Bachelet and Joseph Roty here. They remain established classics. I would say that Denis Bachelet's wines have become a little bit more, I won't say extracted, but they are a little bit more tannic than they used to be when I knew them in the 80s. But they have a just unbelievable intensity and a hedonistic perfume to them. And one of you's having a Gevrey-Chambertin tonight, and that's a great favourite of mine. Rising star, and I mentioned him through his village vineyards, but he's also got micro amounts of Griot-Chambertin, for example, a little bit more Latricia-Chambertin, and he's got a good holding of Lavaux Saint-Jacques, including some ancient vines from the 1920s, which he bottles apart, is Pierre Durocher. And his pricing from the domain has gone up, secondary market's gone up a bit. He's not yet in Fourier territory, but you are having to pay more of a premium, and I do think his wines are good. I thought he was absolutely outstanding in 2018. Yeah. Then we have other names who are very good indeed. Some of them are bigger estates. They're not especially changing in price in the secondary market, but they are getting a good price for their wines, and they deserve to. There are the cousins. There's Jean-Louis Trappet and his cousins at Rossignol-Trappet. They've both been biodynamic for a long time. They both have big holdings of Chambertin, plus also Latricia-Chambertin and Chapelle-Chambertin, and some good Premier Crus. The Trappet wines are in a sort of explosive, becoming more natural style. Rossignol-Trappet, also biodynamic, also a whole bunch, but a little bit more in a more classical reference. Both those domains are really, really good wines. Drouin-Larose, also with the son having taken over. Nicolas, I think, I really love their 2017s. As it happens, I don't think 2018 suited them so much. I'd like to retaste those wines from bottled samples, but in general, that's a domain that's got really good vineyard holdings and is well worth watching. Who else have I got on my list? We've got Christian Séraphin, now his niece Frédérique taking over, but she's kept the same style. It's pretty powerful wines, but you really have to wait for those. Sylvie Emenin, who makes the best Vallée of the Clos Saint-Jacques, doesn't seem to be interested in putting the price up enormously. It's a slightly controversial style because there's plenty of new wood from her partner Dominique Laurent, and lots of whole bunch. It's quite an extravagant style, but it tames very well later on, and her Vieille Vigne is extremely good value. Philippe Charlepin, who absolutely rode to fame in the US, was hugely appreciated there. For some reason, never really caught on in the UK. I'd also look out, however, if you liked his wines, his son, Yann Charlepin, has set up his own domain. He originally bought David Clark's domain in Morey, and but has now moved to Philippe Charlepin's old house in the main drag. There he is, and if you know Philippe Charlepin, you will realise that Yann Charlepin is definitely his son. There's no funny business going on there. And that's Yann in his, the cellar he's taken over in Gevrey-Chambertin. Okay, thanks for that. Let me go back to the map. Other classic names, there was what I used to call this Street of Shame, because I thought there was a period in the 70s and 80s when I really didn't like the wines much from any of these domains. And they all had lots of Grand Crus, huge holdings of Grand Crus. They all lived in the same street. They were Damois, which has been a lot better for a long time, but you do need to like late harvest style wines to appreciate his. He made some really punchy 18s, 15.5 alcohol, but weirdly enough, they still tasted balanced. And then there was Camus, who grows pretty good grapes, many of which are sold for other people to turn into wine. And I don't know what the reason is, but I have never enjoyed the wines that he's bottled himself. And then there's Reborceau, which again, I felt was very underperforming and has recently been sold to Martin Bouygues, is now a majority shareholder, or his company is. I haven't yet tasted anything in the new regime. I know that there are the de Sorel family who are running Reborceau before remain involved. I don't know what new investments happened and what changes. It's on my list to go and visit. But we should certainly expect something dramatic to come out of Reborceau in the future. Then let me mention a few youngsters who are up and coming, relative youngsters. I think Florence Herristein is making exciting wine. I mentioned her for the Goulo that she has, a number of other vineyards. She's into phytotherapy, which is when you cure your vines with little infusions from different plants. And I thought her 17s were really stylish. I've also in the last few vintages immensely appreciated what Charles Magnan, domain Henri Magnan, has been doing. And he is probably the go-to domain for the Castier, along with Faverly, have big holdings of it. So they're on the upward path. I've just heard about a domain Guillon, Guillon, but I haven't got there yet. Micro quantities, but people are telling me they're very good. There's a small domain called Pernod Père et Fils. I tasted their wines during the Roy-Chambertin tasting last year and thought they came out very well. In November, that was. I tasted the 17s, 18s then, 18s I think. But again, I haven't yet managed to visit the domain. I will. René Leclerc, that's moving on a generation, and François Leclerc is making some wines under his own name and I think under the René Leclerc label. And I particularly enjoyed what I tasted of his 18s under his own label. So that's one to look out for. And that again will be a good range Grand Cru Village Premier Cru. And Alexandrine Roy, R-O-Y, also mostly I think it's Village Gevrey there, but she's getting a great reputation. And so many more I could mention. Is Armand Geoffroy, Géantais, Humbert, somebody asked about, who wines are good and competent, but I do find that there's a little bit of a house style, the same. There are the Berguet boys who took over from their father, Alain, and indeed a cousin of theirs, Nicolas. Domaine Lucien Boyau, that's Pierre Boyau, who's brother of Louis Boyau now in Chambord. Domaine Tortechaux, there's the other Morte, Thierry Morte. I liked his 18s because I used to find his wines fractionally undernourished, but with the greater warmth, they came into their own. Various members of the Marchand family, of which my preferred one was Marchand Griot, and they've got an extraordinary cuvée of Champperrier from over 100-year-old vines, which I thought was wonderful. And several more. Seguin, I need to go back and taste again. Trappé Rochelandais, another offshoot of the Trappés. I don't know what sort of relationship. That's 50 plus domains in Gevrey-Chambertin, so we don't just have to go back to Rousseau every time. Yes, David has mentioned René Bouvier. I mentioned the Bouvier estate when I talked about Marsannay, but and they do, of course, have vineyards here in Gevrey as well. Grand. I think most of the formal questions we have actually covered. Oh yeah, someone's asked, Mark's asked, I'm not familiar with Combat. Is there a particular affordable Gras? Ha ha ha, no. You would recommend. All Combats are quite expensive. Dujac have the most brilliant one. And let me think. So many people actually. There's a tiny bit from both Trappé, which I think goes into a Premier Cru blend. A tiny bit from Rossignol Trappé that tends not to get exported. Yeah, I know. does Henri Meunier have it? I shall have to look up if I can do that while I'm talking. My brain is not sufficiently engaged to have remembered everybody, but I will look up even as we speak and find that out for you, who else has got one. But nobody is offering their combots cheaply, because it's understood that it is one of the special Premier Crus. Let's see if I can find my list of combots. The biggest holder is Dujac, then there's Pierre Amiot, Leroy have combot, how could I forget that? But Domaine Leroy, I don't think that's going to come into the category. Arnaud Père et Fils, Georges Lignier, Domaine des Beaumont, David Dubon, Rossillon-Trappé, Marchand Frères. Those in descending order of volume are the producers in combot. Grand. So I am going to, we have another 10 minutes officially to run. I don't mind if we are overrun by a few minutes, but I'm probably going to leave Gevrey there if you're happy that I've covered what was of interest for you. On we will go, and we will move next door into Morey-Saint-Denis. Remembering, of course, that in pre-appellation days, an awful lot of Morey would have been sold as Gevrey-Chambertin or as Chambon-Musigny. And it's still a village which has a little bit of difficulty establishing itself in the marketplace between its better known friends on either side. Now you can see here running across the band that goes all the way across in that light purple color, which is where the Grand Crus are. A tiny bit of Bon Mar got left over in Morey-St-Denis. I'm frustrated that they drew the boundary there, because it would have just been cleaner to have had it all in one village or the other. But I will say that I think the style of Bon Mar is much more Morey-St-Denis style than it is Chambon-Musigny style. Then Clé d'État, Monopoly. Clé de l'Ombre, Monopoly, almost. Little vegetable garden there has been replanted with a handful of vines belonging to Topinamerne. So, then Clé Saint-Denis, now bigger than its original size. Clé de la Roche, now bigger than its original size. So they follow on, and if you moved across from the lower part of Clé de la Roche, that bit that's cut out of it would be the Premier Cru combat from Gevrey. Right, so you know, I wouldn't mind expanding Morey-St-Denis and allowing them to have combat as well, and allowing them to have Mazoyer-Chambertin, and allowing them to have Bon Mar, but it's not going to happen. The other thing is that the Premier Crus are all very small in size. The biggest one is still under 5 hectares. And as a result of that, there isn't anyone that's big enough to have established itself as a brand out there in the marketplace. They're often split between lots of different producers, and quite a lot of producers just to a blended Morey Premier Cru. A couple that you will have come across are Montlouison up here because of Ponceau's white wine, especially, and also La Bussière because of Roumier's Clé de la Bussière. La Bussière is a monopoly with the family house in the middle of it. You may also have seen Faconière, Milan, the Chaffeau, various others, but I don't think many people in their own mind have got an understanding for what those individual vineyards can do. Well, the good news is that our friend, the geologist Françoise Venier, has been doing her magic work, along with a pedologist as well, in drawing up maps of the soil. They were asked to do this, commissioned to do this by the Syndicat of Morey-Saint-Denis. They've got the results back. They're planning to do sort of a special day with various journalists to show all the maps, go and look at the soils. They dug holes, they can show what the different features are. And out of this, I hope we will start to see the possibilities of more individual personalities coming out of the different Premier Crus. And that's what Morey-Saint-Denis needs to do to get itself back on the map. It also needs to start talking about its own character, rather than saying, oh, well, you know, we make wines which are as fine as Chambon-Musigny and as structured as Gevrey-Chambertin, which tends to be how they describe themselves. You will see that there are actually 2 bands of Premier Crus. That you've got the ones which are above, a village, Morey-Saint-Denis. You've got the ones which are above the Grand Crus, which are much cooler and typically on white marl. So you will see some white grapes planted up in Montlouison. in La Bidaude has got some whites. On La Rue de Vergy has got some whites as well as reds, and they work very well. This is not a case of people saying, I just can't sell my Morey red, let's plant some whites. Those ones up there do justify, I think, having white grapes planted, and the wines are quite lively. One or two bits of whites planted down below, but it's less obvious that that's white wine territory. So what's happening in the village in terms of producers? Dujac, they happen to be my very good friends, and they now have such a strong hand of Grand Crus all over the place. They've got tiny bits of Chambertin, Romney-Saint-Vivant. They've got big bits of Clos de la Roche, Clos-Saint-Denis, Echezeaux, Bonnemar, Chambertin. What else have I? Jeremy will be on the phone in a second telling me what I've left out. But that's already quite a good handful of Grand Crus. They've got Combat, they've got Vosne-Romanée-Malconsor, Vosne-Romanée-Beaumont, a whole host of things. So they're up there in my top category. Ponceau is a great classic name. Of course, there were sort of family ructions. Some people think that the really great era for Ponceau is in the 1980s. We did the tasting in Hong Kong, which bore out how brilliant those wines were. And particularly the Clos de la Roche 1980 is a little bit of a legend. But the 83 is such a difficult vintage, were really good. The 85s are magnificent, so were the 88s. Anyway, Laurent Ponceau's gone off to do his own thing, and I've loved his early vintages. And his sister, Rosemarie Ponceau, with professional technical director and vineyard person and so on, has taken control at the family domain Ponceau, is not trying to change things too much. And it'll be really interesting to see how these first vintages work out for her and her team. Perramino is making some pretty amazing wines. They are quite expensive. A few Grand Crus from Gevrey-Chambertin are actually from purchased grapes, but plots where he more or less controls, and most importantly is able to choose the picking date. But apart from that, he's got his own domain, Chambertin, Masvoyer-Chambertin, an extraordinary Nuits Saint-Georges, Richemont, and a brilliant Chambord-Musigny, Comte d'Orvaux. But I would pick him out as being top. His cousins over the road, Topinot, Môme, are now extremely good as well. You can argue either way. You've got three members of the extended Ligné family. Hubert Ligné, classic in the time of the father. His son, Romain, before his tragic early death, also was really good. Then very slight interruption while they worked out where to go next. And other son, Laurent Ligné, came back from, I think, 2011. And what he's doing now is, again, world class. Georges Ligné, I felt, hasn't been as good. I think there have been some improvements recently, still got further to go, but they're not in the same price range at all. And then Ligné Michelot, Virgile Ligné Michelot, is making some lovely, lovely wines too. Domaine Arlo, the brothers and sister who does the horse ploughing, but Cyprien Arlo is the one more or less in charge. Certified biodynamic, some very smart wines there, and he's been in charge of the project of getting the vineyards mapped out. Somebody else who helps in a number of these projects is Jérôme Castagnier, who's making wines with immediate impact. Clos-Saint-Denis, Clos de la Roche, Chambertin, Clos Vougeot. They're quite dark coloured wines, quite powerful. I'm always struck by them, tasting them young in the cellar. There's a range of some super generics, 3 different generics, which I like. And we'll need to wait and see exactly how they age, whether or not they aren't a little bit chunky. But they're very good value at the moment, well worth looking at. An old established classic, kept under the radar. So perhaps I shouldn't mention the name, but I think many of you will know it anyway. Juan, now moved down from Father Henri Juan to son Philippe. But it's a small domain and not much seen in, quite a bit goes to the States, I think, not much seen in the UK and many other export markets. But a light and fine style. Those of you who used to like the wines of Jacques Truchot, it's in that style there. And of course, I need to mention Cécile Tremblay, whose wines are also joining the secondary market high prices. Alas, always sorry to see that. she knows very much what she's doing. Has got a lovely, or rather, although rather sadly rather small winery, which is going to have to increase in size because she gets some more vineyards back, family vineyards, from other members of her extended family in, I think, 2022, a couple of years' time. So those are mostly the people in Morey-St-Denis. I haven't mentioned any of the Magnards. Stéphane Magnard took over from Father Jean-Paul, and also on the main road, Michel Magnard. Complete turnaround from having made wines which had a certain amount of new oak but always tasted very, very oaky. Now he's gone biodynamic and is no new oak at all. Everything is put into amphoras. I found it a bit strange that somebody could switch so dramatically from a sort of rather, in those days, modern style with the oak to amphorae, but the wines have benefited from that. And gosh, I'm sure I've forgotten other people. There are the Amios, Raffet. I used to buy a tiny bit of wine from grandfather Raffet, Jean Raffet. Then it's Gerard still there, and his very talented daughter Marion is getting involved. And then there is Chantal Remy, where you can go and buy old wines. Oof! I've had my hour, and I think I've covered most of the ground I wanted to cover. I don't think Morey-Saint-Denis, I can't immediately see big changes that are going to happen in this village from the global warming. When we get to Chambon-Musigny in another week's time. In fact, I haven't decided yet. We're either going to do Chambon-Musigny and the rest of the Côte Nuits next week, or save that up for the 4th of July and head to the Côte de Beaune next week. But I hope that that's been of interest and has covered lots of ground. I think I've managed to talk about most of your questions. Somebody did pop up one about Vougeret and their vines up in this area. But my favourite vineyard of theirs of all is the not Chambon-Musigny, it's the Gevrey-Chambertin Les Mazoyères, because it's 80 to 100-year-old vines, and that really, really helps. So yes, Miriam, we will do Pommard, perhaps next week. In fact, I think let's go that way next week. Let's do the reds of the Côte de Beaune next week, just to give us enough change. And after that, we will have reds of the southern Côte de Nuits and also whites of the Côte de Beaune. And then maybe we'll look at Chablis or the Marsannay and places like that. So stay well. Join me on the other BAT channel, on the 67 Pall Mall channel on Thursday. Any of you who've joined in and don't currently subscribe to our Jasper Morris Inside Burgundy website, then please do. Otherwise, I shall sign off and see you next time. Thank you very much.